We would like to get started if everybody's ready. Thank you. Well, welcome. Glad that you can be here this evening. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce tonight Dr. Behrman, who will be our presenter. Dr. Behrman is... Where's that coming from? Dr. Behrman is a licensed clinical social worker. He is a counselor, consultant, and educator. Has a private practice in St. Louis and specializes in particular in faith-based counseling and therapy. Dr. Behrman was with us in September to talk about aging gracefully. And this evening he's going to speak to us about pastoral responses to teenage anxiety and depression. So please help me welcome Dr. Gary Behrman.
Thank you for my front row audience here. It's an honor to be here tonight. Tell you a little bit about myself, but before I do that, I'm really grateful to see the young high school group here tonight because I just left my office in Kirkwood, Missouri, and I held the hand of a 20-year-old college student whose best friend died by suicide. Shattering, to say the least. So tonight's presentation is going to emphasize early detection. How many of you realize that stage 1 cancer is your chances of getting through that are much higher than when you discover it in stage 4, right? So it's the same thing with anxiety and depression, folks. The earlier help is received, the better the chance the counselor, the pastor, the school principal, the school counselor can help. So many parents and young people say, well, I'm going to wait until it gets worse. And so that tonight's presentation is going to try to break apart that thinking that let's just wait till it gets worse and then we'll ask for help. The second main point I'm going to make tonight, when your loved one has cancer, do you say, my love is enough to get them through? And how often do parents make the same mistake with depression and anxiety? My love is enough to get my kid through their depression. So depression and anxiety are serious. Early detection saves lives. Okay? A little bit about me. My career as a social worker was training in first responder. So after a tornado, after a bank robbery, after a suicide or homicide in the workplace, I was called to stabilize the workplace and work with the individuals who were either traumatized or their lives seriously disrupted after the bank robbery or whatever. So I did one-on-one counseling and group workplace work. During that time, I began to see a lot of people reporting transformation following their trauma. So my research, I decided to go to New York and study for 4 years how do people transform their lives following trauma rather than go on disability. And lo and behold, it was 2001 in August when I landed I chose the State University of New York, and 10 days later 9/11 happened. So I'm the dean at the at the State University, knew why I came to study with them, so I was assigned to Ground Zero my first semester in doctoral studies. Subsequently, I've been publishing in that area, doing continuous research on the role of faith and spirituality in transforming our lives following trauma, transforming our lives following depression. So when we get struck by depression, does that mean we have to be miserable the rest of our lives? My research says no. Okay? I came back to St. Louis University, was assigned as an associate dean, Did that for a decade, and then I left there to become clinical director at an adolescent suicide prevention center. So a lot of my stories tonight are based on my experience at the Suicide Prevention Center for adolescents and young adults. During that time, I wrote a grant and with St. Louis University School of Medicine, and I now am embedded in the School of Medicine, and I'm teaching new doctors called interns and residents. I'm teaching them about their role in early detection of anxiety and depression in their post-oncology, post-surgical, post-cardiac arrest, etc. Because we do know that many people following surgery, following a heart attack, following a cancer diagnosis, can slide into depression. So I'm training brand new doctors of all disciplines how to recognize early symptoms of depression and anxiety and how to get them to the proper level of care. So I've been doing that now for about 5 years, okay? I left the Suicide Prevention Center because I wanted more control over my personal schedule, and I wanted to do more seminars like this. And the demands of being a director, I wouldn't be able to be here tonight. So I'm now in private practice in Kirkwood, Missouri, and doing multiple seminars, at least 1 or 2 a week, plus my private practice, plus teaching at St. Louis University. So that's a little bit about me. So I'll be drawing upon real-life stories with the adolescents and young adults that I've worked with. In my private practice, my oldest client is 73. And I don't go below middle. I do see some middle school kids, but mainly high school and college and young adults and adults of any age. Okay? So that's a little bit about me. I'm sure there's a lot of experience in this room and a lot of expertise. So I don't want to do all the talking. Okay? So do not resist holding up your hand and getting my attention if you have something valuable to contribute and or if you have a pertinent question. Okay? So don't be reticent, don't be reluctant to contribute or to ask a question. Yes, thank you.
So why is the anxiety, depression, suicide so much higher in today's world than it was when, like, myself grew up in the late 70s, early 80s?
So the question is, how come anxiety and depression is more prevalent today than in the 1970s when he was growing up? The research, in my own opinion, is that it's not higher. It's just being diagnosed. Many of my classmates, if I look back in grade school, I had a classmate who was tied to his chair in 3rd grade. He had an anxiety disorder. He didn't have a behavioral problem. I think we dealt with anxiety and depression with alcohol. You know, many people who became alcoholic had undiagnosed and untreated depression and anxiety. So I think it looks like we have more cases today. I'm not sure that's a fact. The fact is we do have a lot of cases. Whether it's more or less, we could argue about that. But let's just all admit that we have a lot of people who are anxious and depressed. One theory to support your question, that we have more anxiety today because of the fast pace. That, we are moving in seconds now instead of days. It used to take days to accomplish something. Now you can be in touch with your friend in 2 seconds, right? So I think the fast pace of keeping up with everything. The other big thing that I will talk about in my presentation is the lack of sunlight and the lack of darkness. Did you know that sunlight stimulates the brain to secrete serotonin, which is energy? And a lot of our kids are inside way too much, and when they're outside, they're lathered with sunscreen. Secondly, melatonin is secreted only by darkness. And our fluorescent lights, when my grandparents were growing up, there was darkness. And so melatonin, the brain responds to darkness by secreting melatonin. So I think there's some scientific backup to what you're saying, that we are a more anxious society, perhaps more depressed. But we do know during the Great Depression, suicide was very prevalent. A lot of depression. Call it the Great Depression. So let's just say we have anxiety and depression today, and let's deal with it. Let's find effective ways to treat it. Okay, but thank you for starting us off with that question. Hit enter. Hit enter.
Yeah. Yeah. There we go.
Okay, so we're going to recognize early warning signs. One thing that I'm really grateful for in my training is that you cannot treat anxiety and depression just with the patient. You have to treat the family. Because anxiety and depression not only impacts the individual, but the whole family. So many parents, when they schedule an appointment for their 16-year-old son, they say, do I need to come along? I said, of course. This is a family issue. The family needs treatment, not just the individual. So recognize the needs of the family, incorporate safety plans, and what are some resources? What's the scope of the problem? It's a major public health problem. There's a growing body of evidence that we can lower the rates of suicide, and our churches play a critical role in implementing strategies to lower suicide. Okay, so the green is homicide rates, and the red is suicide rates. And what gets more attention? Homicide, right. So we can see that suicide is almost twice the rate, if not 3 times the rate of suicide in our society. Age adjusted. So look at males is the top line. The bottom line is females, and the total is in the middle. So suicide is gradually creeping up. What are the means? Poisoning, almost 40% is overdosing with pills. Firearms, and this is amongst female, and suffocation is hanging. So we're looking at almost 44 out of 10 women who attempt suicide use pills. And look at amongst men, 60% of males use firearms, only 12% use pills, and hanging and other. I don't know why I omitted this slide. This is very, very significant. 80% of all suicides, 80, are white males. How do you interpret that data? Less than 1% of all suicides are African American females. Sir, how would you interpret that data? How come 8 out of 10 suicides are white males, and 1 out of 100 suicides are African American females? How would you interpret that data? What's that all about? Why are us white guys more at risk? Why do you think white guys are more at risk for suicide?
You might be less happy.
Are we less happy?
Greater expectation.
Ah, you read my research.
Socialization.
Somebody else had their hand up back here.
I was just going to say that maybe because guys don't tend to talk with other people as much as women do.
Men die by heart attack and cancer at greater rates also than women. Why? Because they wait too long to get help. Men die by heart attacks and cancer at a greater rate than women because we wait until the symptoms are so severe that we go for help. So the Caucasian African Americans data is interesting to go home tonight over a cup of coffee and say, why are Caucasians so much higher at risk than minorities?
Well, probably because of their pride.
Pride? Pride and expectations. So there is a lot of research that supports that we have expectations for happiness. You know, we need to have a 2-car garage and now a 3-car garage. And we need, and if we don't meet those expectations, we're a failure. We're not happy. So I think it's just important to talk about it. Why do we need to worry about white males more than any other population for suicide? Why? I think it's a sociological question, it's a spiritual question, it's a psychological, theological question. What is it about us white guys that make us more at risk for suicide than any other group of people? Latino women are below 1%. African American males make up about 10-11% of suicides. So we need to really look at that data. So this is the age group. Look at 15 to 24. Isn't this shocking? The number 2 cause of death is suicide, above cancer. You know what's the only category that's higher? Accidents. Accidents is the leading cause of death for that 15 to 24. The second highest is suicide. Pretty scary. Okay, next. Oh, here it is. I did have it. There it is. Look at Black Hispanic rates of suicide in American Indians, American Natives, and white people. I did have it in here. Okay, next. So, look at the sharp rise in suicide amongst our retired geriatric population. That's a sad statement about our society, isn't it? How suicide rates spike at retirement. And I think it ties into what you said, sir, that who am I that I'm no longer an engineer, I'm no longer a plumber, I'm not neat, what's going on in retirement for white males that causes depression? It's a very serious question to ask ourselves. So there's a huge spike. The darker the color of the state, the more prevalent is suicide. Next. So what's missing? Where are the gaps? And I don't use the word prevent, because we can't prevent cancer. We can't prevent heart attacks. They'll always be with us. We cannot prevent suicide, but we can lower the risk. We can lower the number of heart attacks by healthy diets and exercise. But there are still going to be heart attacks. We can lower the risk for cancer. We can lower the risk for suicide. And that's a really important point to make, because like the young lady who was in my office that late afternoon, what could have I done to prevent my best friend's suicide up at college? Up at Truman State. And I said, we cannot prevent suicide, but we can lower the risk of it happening. So the guilt and the shame that follows a suicide is very intense, very disabling, very crippling. Because we all ask ourselves, what could have I done? What should have I done if I only knew? So research reveals that many people who are thinking of harming themselves turn to clergy rather than counselors. More than twice as many people with mental health problems will see a pastoral team member, their CYO monitor, their pastoral associate, their pastor, than a therapist. People may be more comfortable with their pastor than with the therapist. Religious counseling doesn't have the same negative connotations as someone who goes to a shrink. Oh, you go to a shrink? Versus, I went and saw my pastor. See the difference? And many people are not able to afford mental health, and Father Bill is free. Right? Free counseling. Right? So those are some of the things that pastoral leadership teams, your whole team of leadership here at St. Nicholas, need to be very sensitive to their role and their responsibilities in early detection of a parishioner who comes to them and then referring them to the proper level of care. It's It's like your PCP, your primary care physician, your pediatrician. They go, oh, I think you better go see a cardiologist. This is too big for me to handle. Oh, I think you better go to the oncologist. I think there might be something going on with your lymph glands. And that's the role of pastoral teams. It's the role of parents, spouses. I think this is bigger than me. I think you better go to a professional. My love is not enough to get you through this. Next. So the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention identified churches as key gatekeepers, as people who regularly come into contact with individuals and families in distress. Congregations like St. Nicholas must be trained to recognize behavioral patterns and other factors that place individuals at risk for suicide and be equipped with strategies that are effective before the behaviors and early signs evolve and get worse. So you young people, when a friend comes to you depressed, it's not your responsibility to fix it. It's your responsibility to care for them. Hey, I got your back. But I think you need to go see the school counselor. This is bigger than me. So what are our kids saying to us? I did a research project and got it published in a pediatric journal. It's published. And I want to tell you what I gathered adolescents who were receiving professional mental health care, parents, social workers, and pediatricians themselves. I interviewed lots and lots of people. And this is what I heard. This is a teenager telling me, they tell me what's wrong with me, they give me medicine, and they tell me to come back in 3 months. I had no clue about the drugs they were giving me. I'm not a dependent person on anything, so taking medication was weird. It was a problem. This is parents whose son or daughter died by suicide. There were so many holes in the safety net. Poor communication between doctors, pastors, principals at the high school. We need to realize the seriousness of depression. We need to get kids on the radar quicker. With the healthcare system, the frustration was getting the name of a counselor and getting an appointment. Parents of adolescents who died by suicide. He had trouble in school. He hated school. We didn't think she was trying to kill herself. We just thought she drank too much. I wonder if she had gotten on the medications, would have changed everything. I just don't know. He was labeled as a problem. You do a lot of what-ifs all the time. Parents who's helping their children deal with the healthcare system. What do we do? Where do we turn? I just can't believe that there isn't somebody that we can find to get the help we need. Learning how to deal with the chaos in our home that has become way too normal. Parents need help and support. We want people to understand how hopeless we can feel at times. I want youth ministers to know how to teach kids to be full of hope. And I, as a parent, thought I was going to be the next one to have some type of depression. It was my first experience taking my kid to a counselor. I didn't know what to do to help my daughter. It was difficult to find help. It was a struggle to find someone who was knowledgeable. I just didn't know what to do or where to turn. So those are some of the frustrations that are real. It's not a magic cure by just getting them into the right level of care, getting them to a counselor. It's really important to realize that there's many levels of mental health care. There's going to a master's level counselor. Some are social workers, some are called licensed professional counselors. And then there's psychologists, PhDs, who can provide testing. Most psychologists today do a lot of testing in schools. and in hospitals and clinics. They test to see, is it bipolar, is it major depression? And there are also psychologists who have practices who provide counseling. And then there's MD psychiatrists who, very few today provide counseling, they provide medication. A new profession that is growing in numbers in the mental health system is nurse practitioners. They can prescribe medication and provide counseling. Okay? So those are the 4 levels of care that, and then there's inpatient for someone who's suicidal, and then there's intensive outpatient, which means 6 hours a day and you go back home every night. 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. So there's all different levels of care depending on the diagnosis and the seriousness of the mental illness. Okay? So what are some of the early warning signs? These are some of the 6 dominant reasons why our young people will not go to a counselor. It's not going to work. It's not going to help me. Number 2, ineffective coping. One of my strategies in counseling high school and young adults, and I use the image of a toolbox. A good carpenter has a hammer, a screwdriver, a saw, etc. A saw doesn't work in every situation. Sometimes you need a hammer. So with my clients, I teach them to have various tools to manage anxiety in different situations. That this strategy won't work in every situation. So giving my clients tools to manage anxiety before I recommend medication. So building their toolbox of strategies and coping to deal with anxiety, panic attacks, and or depression. So, toxic induced. Unfortunately, many young people die by suicide while they're under the influence of alcohol, marijuana, or an illegal drug, or sometimes a legal prescription drug that they stole out of their parents' medicine cabinet. I have a senior from a Catholic boys' high school in St. Louis who was rushed by ambulance to Mercy Hospital because he stole some of his mother's Adderall and vaped marijuana, and he couldn't breathe. Luckily, his mother came down the basement and saw that he was having a really rough time breathing, called an ambulance and saved his life. So we now know, it's all over the media, that vaping, especially vaping marijuana, is extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. And in this case, the young man combined it with some of his mother's Adderall, and he literally couldn't breathe. So toxic induced. I always do a clear check and assessment on, with the parents, with the spouse, how good is this person at controlling their temper, flying off the handle. Did you know that 95 to 99% of adolescents who die by suicide do not leave a suicide note? Why? Why don't they leave suicide notes? They didn't want to. But in that impulsive moment, where 95% of geriatric suicides, old people who die, 95% leave a note. Leave instructions. So I'm always very, very careful at measuring a young person's impulse control. So I always ask parents, and if it's an adult, I'll ask the spouse, how many rage attacks does this person have in 1 week? And if it's high, see, and the patient himself is not going to admit the rage attacks. That's why I have to work with the family. Because most adults and young people say, hey, I don't get angry that often. And the husband shakes his head and says, really? Really? You're denying the times you have poor impulse control? So parents, it's really important that your kids have tools to manage panic. Because unfortunately, most adolescent suicides take place in a moment of panic. It wasn't planned. The suicide wasn't planned. When I was the clinical director at the Suicide Prevention Center and in my practice today, I stand at my door and say a prayer for everybody I saw that day, that they'll be safe. Because we have to take into consideration impulse. They're safe when they leave my office, but there's no guarantee. And that's why you young people with your friends, you have to make sure they're under the care of a professional. Because when they get off the Snapchat with you, something may trigger them. And a counselor can teach them how to manage that impulse, that panic attack, how to lower it so it's not so strong and overwhelming. So a lot of guilt and shame, and also crying out for help, and nobody's listening to me. So the guilt and shame, I could spend a whole hour talking about how that is integral to mental illness. The guilt, and that's where my research comes in with faith and spirituality. The guilt that we feel for not being a good enough parent, for not being a good enough son. The shame we feel for being gay, for flunking a biology test, for not making the basketball team. Shame and guilt is a precursor to depression and anxiety. So we really need to pay attention to that and really heal all shame and guilt. Unfortunately, our Catholic religious tradition has rituals called the Sacrament of Penance to help us get through the shame and guilt. Okay, so I take a holistic approach when I meet a client for the first time. I use the metaphor of a chair, a stool, a four-legged stool. And I first look at, how are you sleeping? How are you eating? Are you sleeping? Are you sleeping? Sleep is the number one factor to pay attention to. Why? Why is sleep the most important factor in mental health? Right. Without sleep, how many of you are great coping persons when you're sleep deprived? Talk to new mothers with a 3-month-old baby. Talk to mothers with a 3-month-old baby. So my first question always is, tell me about your sleeping habits. And how many adolescents are on their phones till 1 a.m.? And they wonder why they can't cope the next day at school. Without sleep, we don't cope with anxiety and depression as well. So I always get an assessment on sleep, appetite, and I don't use the word exercise anymore, I use the word movement. I saw a young client today, young adult, who doesn't exercise. But she works at Target and she walks for 8 hours. She literally her job means taking things off the shelf, packing it, shipping it. I said, you're getting plenty of movement. So movement is very important to get oxygenated blood to the organs, sleep, and nutrition. We would all be foolish if we don't take care of the oil and the gas in our cars, right? And yet some of us believe it doesn't make any difference what I eat in managing my anxiety and depression. Yet we don't believe that about our cars. Nutrition has nothing to do with my levels of depression. Hello? Hello? My diet has nothing to do with my anxiety. Hello? Hello? I encourage all of my high schoolers to either eat yogurt or take a probiotic. Why? Because research sees the connection, they call it gut depression, that we need healthy bacteria in our stomachs to have proper brain functioning. And anybody who takes an antibiotic especially should be immediately on a probiotic, because probiotics and yogurt reintroduce the good bacteria that the brain needs to stay healthy. So I have a whole handout on nutrition and depression. And I get great results from my clients who follow a nutritious lifestyle, movement in their daily life, and good sleep. Many of my clients do not need medication if they follow those three. The fourth leg of the chair is the spiritual leg, which is loss of activities. So finding something that's meaningful. I had a 14-year-old 3 o'clock client today who was suicidal, who's doing much better. But it's really, he was a straight A student in middle school, athlete. He's having a rough time as a freshman for all kinds of reasons. And I'm trying to find a new goal for him, a motivation that gives him a reason to wake up in the morning. I can't do it for him, but I can help him dig deep to find something. So he wants to be a veterinarian, so I came up with volunteering at the Humane Society down his street. We'll see. He needs something other than school to motivate him. So I look at the 4 chairs, and tied in with that is the third one, is isolating from your friends, from your family. I cannot tell you how many parents who bring their son or daughter to me say, I can't get her out of her bedroom. Whenever she's home, she's in her bedroom alone. So I try to make it a rule that you only sleep in your bedroom. Hello? What a novel concept, right? You don't eat in your bedroom. You don't study in your bedroom. You use your bedroom for sleep alone. Psychologically, it makes a huge difference that when you enter that room, this is for sleep. Just as when you enter a library or you enter a church, this is quiet time. You're automatically ready to be quiet when you enter a library, a church, or a museum. A classroom, your mind, your body automatically thinks quiet. Same thing with your bedroom. The worst thing you can do is have a TV in your bedroom. Why? What I tell my clients is to turn all the lights off in your bedroom, open the blinds, the shades, and step out into the yard and turn your TV on. It's the 4th of July. The color, the lights, the movement, boom, 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 boom. It's just, try it. And your brain is absorbing that, and then you expect it to quiet down in 15 minutes. Your eyes are taking in all this light and movement. It's getting rammed up. It's a light show. And we know that reacting to light stimulates the brain. And so what do? We take a sleeping pill. Okay, enough of my soapbox. Next. So, major depression is the leading cause of disability. It affects lots of people. It is epidemic. And unfortunate opiates and other prescription drugs are increasing this risk. According to the Center for Disease Control, antidepressants are the 3rd most common prescription, skyrocketing 400%. Now this could be good news, that people with depression and anxiety are getting the proper medication that they need. You can look at it that way, that this is really good news. That some anxiety and some depression requires medication, and people are finally getting it. Or you can say, what's going on? That it's a 400% increase. I'll leave that up to your own judgment, whether this is a negative are positive. Okay. So what are some of the symptoms of depression? I started with the most common one. Us white guys express our depression through anger. How many high school kids are suspended or labeled as a bad kid because of their anger and rage? My opinion, it's untreated, unrecognized depression. We respond to loneliness, lack of motivation, prolonged sadness by getting angry. And many women scratch their head and say, why is he so angry all the time? This is a broad generalization, but women tend to isolate and get sad and withdraw with their depression. Men tend to get angry and irritable. Now that is not absolute, that is not every man, every woman, but I just think it's really important to realize that isolation and withdrawal and anger and irritability are the two sides of the same coin. Depression. So the next time somebody is really angry, you go, wow, where is that coming from? What's that about? Look for symptoms of depression. Not a bad egg. Lack of motivation, physical complaints, chronic fatigue, lack of focus, etc. So these are the major symptoms of depression, and we're going to distinguish depression from sadness in just a moment. Go ahead. So the origins, you all knew what etiology means, right? All of you? Right. The etiology, the origins of depression, genetic research indicates that there's several factors, and just as there's breast cancer that runs in a family, heart problems that run in families, unfortunately, depression and anxiety run in families. Because there is a genetic component that some of us are more susceptible to depression and anxiety than others are. So I always do a family history. Your parents, your grandparents, your siblings. Because doesn't the doctor do the same thing about the heart? Are there heart problems in your family? Is there cancer in your family? Breast cancer, etc. It's the same thing with depression. I'm going to throw this out ahead of time. We have a brain and we have a mind. The brain is an organ, folks. Hundreds of thousands of evolution has designed it the way it is. And it's really, really powerful. We have a pancreas, we have a kidney, we have a lung. They're all organs, and sometimes the kidney doesn't function correctly. Sometimes the pancreas doesn't. And that person needs some extra insulin help. Many people are labeled as not trying hard enough, they're lazy, they're a bad egg. When it's their brain, their organ they're fighting against. This is not working right. And yet we shame and blame either the parents for not doing a good enough job with their kid, or we shame and blame the kid himself when we're maybe dealing with a faulty brain. Just as we have faulty pancreases, kidneys, lungs. So I think it's really important to realize that some depressions, some anxieties have an organic genetic base. And you can be the best parent in the world, and you can still have a depressed kid. It's not your parenting. And so getting them to a professional to determine whether this is a genetic issue, an organic issue, or a behavioral issue, or both. Or both. So trauma can trigger depression. And some depression, we call it dysthymia. It's been over our heads, hanging over our heads our whole life. That's called dysthymia. It's just been this aching, loneliness, discomfort, not feeling like I fit in. It's just been with me as long as I can remember. It's called dysthymia. So there's many different types of depression. So we all manifest depression in different ways. Common features are sadness, emptiness, and anger, accompanied by physical and mental changes. What differs? How long has it been going on in your life? When did it begin? And what's the origin of your depression? So it could be all of those factors. Do you see how a professional is needed to determine all this? So, these are the different types of depression. Disruptive mood, major depressive disorder, the persistent depression called dysthymia, premenstrual. I can't tell you how many teenage girls I've helped with their depression and anxiety by getting their estrogen straightened out. I said, when's the last time you had a blood draw? And pediatricians, that's why I'm training pediatricians at St. Louis University, that there's a keen connection with levels of estrogen and testosterone in teenagers and their mood. So some girls that have come to me don't need an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety drug. They need something to monitor and level out their estrogen. And the depressive symptoms and anxiety symptoms go away. So do you see where the etiology, the origins need to be really surfaced by a professional? Okay. Oh, and then the medical, go back one. The last one, that's right, you don't have to go back. You don't have to go back. The last one is cancer-induced depression, heart attack-induced depression, and then there's alcohol-induced depression. Okay? Okay, these are the two key things. All of us have a right to be sad. When grandma dies, when our best friend's father from Scott Air Force Base gets transferred to Huntsville, Alabama, he's your best friend for 4 years. And now he's in Huntsville. So there's many good reasons to be sad. That is not depression. Sadness does not take away your hope for the future, nor your tools to stay healthy. Depression does. So the two key characteristics that I look for in my clients, how hopeless and how helpless. So when my 95-year-old grandmother died and I was holding her hand while she died, I did not feel depression because her death didn't take away my future. I still had a lot to live for. I was excited about my future. And I didn't feel helpless about my future. I knew I had a lot of tools and skills to have a great life, even though I would miss her immensely. Depression, if you hear these two words, these two sentences, be on alert. I have nothing to live for, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's not grief and sadness. That's depression. Now, it's not either or. There's a continuum. There's a lot of gray area. And grief can lead into depression. But those are the two key words. I don't have anything to live for. Nobody will miss me when I'm gone. You don't say that when you're sad. You say, I'm going to miss my cat. You don't say, I don't have anything to live for anymore when your cat dies. When you wreck your car, you don't say, I have nothing else to live for. Dang it, this is going to cost me a lot. It's going to jack up my insurance. Dang, I'm aggravated. And dang, this is disruptive. But you don't say, I have nothing to live for anymore, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. So once again, it's on a continuum, a severity. How severe do you have nothing to live for? How severe is there nothing you can do about it? Okay? But that is the key difference between sadness and depression on a continuum. Okay? So grief or depression, adolescents grieve a friend when they move, parents after a divorce, physical injury. I had a young football player in my office last night also. He's 16 years old, and he broke his leg and he missed the last 4 games. And he was one of the fastest running backs on the team, and he wants to get a college scholarship because his parents are lower middle class. His parents were astute and brought him in because after 4 weeks, like it's 4 games he's missed, it's been about 5 or 6 weeks, they're noticing that his sadness, his disappointment is starting to cause him to isolate and get more irritable. Bingo. So sure enough, he has the early signs of depression, but I know I can keep that from getting worse. That he and I, with his parents, can keep it in the sadness range and give him motivation and tools so that his sadness and disappointment in missing the football season and hoping he'll recover fully that he can play his junior year next year, we can prevent that sadness from moving into depression. Next. So adults can move from grief to depression after widowhood, divorce, loss of employment, empty nest syndrome, financial stressors, inability to have children. So there's many factors that could lead an adult into depression. Next. And in geriatrics, my mother had a large group of friends, only one is left. She's 89. So the loss of all your friends when you're 89 years old. Once again, divorce and widowhood. My mom's macular degeneration often makes her very frustrated. She can no longer sew, quilt, read. Physical pain can cause depression. Financial stressors, retirement, and moving from your home that you lived in for 60 years to an apartment. So those are all potential triggers that can lead a person from sadness into depression. Potential. Doesn't necessarily say when you retire you're going to get depressed, but it potentially can. So grief does not automatically mean that you're going to become depressed. However, when they do occur together, the prognosis is serious. It can lead to suicidal ideation. Bereavement-related depression tends to occur with persons who are already mentally, socially, physically, spiritually fragile. That's what high risk factors mean. They're already emotionally, physically, socially, spiritually fragile. And it can be a tipping point. Okay? Yes. Anxiety. Most, or at least half of patients with depression. Why does depression lead to anxiety? Because we get so frustrated in dealing with the depression. I'm sorry, the exact opposite. How does anxiety lead to depression? We get so frustrated with trying to manage the anxiety, we finally say, oh, what the heck, nothing's going to make it better. I'm just so tired of being anxious, panic attacks. So anxiety can lead to depression. When anxiety becomes excessive, it's disabling. There's generalized anxiety, there's OCD, PTSD, and different types of phobias. So it's common for persons to be diagnosed with both. About half the clients I see do have both. When anxiety becomes excessive, irrational, it can be disabling. Next. So there's GAD, worrying about everything, constantly worrying, knowing that they worry too much, trouble relaxing, trouble concentrating, easily startled, trouble falling asleep, feeling tired all the time, physical pains, swallowing becomes a problem, twitching, sweating, lightheaded, out of breath. Sounds like all of us, right? Raise your hand, right? PTSD. This is the image I try to tell people. You have a cold, and you have bronchitis, and you have pneumonia. So you have stress, and you have anxiety, and you have PTSD. Okay? So it's always on a continuum. A cold can lead to bronchitis, bronchitis can lead to pneumonia, stress can lead to anxiety, anxiety can lead to PTSD. I need you to work on my laptop, okay? Yeah. Okay, next. So, the big difference to be aware of, trauma literally changes the organ we call the brain. We now can image the brain and see how the synapses, the neurons and everything have changed. They're disconnected and reconnected in weird places. Severe trauma changes the thinking part of the brain. That's why logic doesn't work with somebody who's traumatized. And this is a huge intervention that I've learned and spent many hours learning how to let go of logic and reason when you're dealing with somebody who's been traumatized. Hey, you didn't cause that accident. You didn't intentionally run into that car and that baby died in the accident. Logic and reason doesn't work when you're traumatized. Because guess what's affected the most? What area of the brain gets rewired? Is the frontal cortex. And that's where logic and reason is. The reptilian part of the brain, the flight or fright, takes over the frontal lobe. And that's why people with PTSD are so erratic, irrational, illogical, because this part of the brain has been rewired in the stem cell. The reptilian part of our brain is overtaking the frontal lobe. We now have images to prove that, to show that. So I always take a somatic, physical approach to healing the brain. I teach people how to soothe physically their brains. What does a mother do when her 3-month-old is having a panic attack in bed at 3 a.m.? Picks the baby up, right? And what else does she do? So I have a whole toolbox full of tapping techniques and rocking techniques that heal and soothe the brain following trauma. If you scream at that little 3-month-old, 6-month-old, "Quit waking me up in the middle of the night, you little crapper! I'm not going to change your diaper for waking me up at 3 a.m. That baby's anxiety is going to get high. And what do we do to our adolescents? We talk to them like that. What are you doing having that rage attack and acting so illogical and irrational? Go to your room and give me your phone. It doesn't work, folks. It doesn't work.
If logic and the rational don't work, would you share with us a few things that do help?
Sure. If logic and rational, I'm going to take your phone away if you don't quit having those rage attacks. It doesn't work. Because with high anxiety and with traumatized brains, this part of the brain has taken over this part of the brain. And so, I have a whole brochure on techniques to soothe the organ we call the brain that rocks it to sleep. So instead of screaming at this frustrating adolescent who's driving us crazy with his anger, his illogical behavior, hug him instead. So I have a whole resource brochure on rocking and tapping. I always admire adolescent boys who tells me my mom still pats me on the back when I'm upset. I'll lay her on the couch and she sits on the couch next to me and she taps my back. It works wonders. I love it when I hear that. At what point do we stop touching our children? Touching our partners. So there's all kinds of physical, somatic approaches to high anxiety and trauma. There's breathing techniques, there's rocking techniques, there's tapping techniques, and research shows that the number one way to heal and soothe the organ we call the brain that needs to get rewired when we have a lot of anxiety is a pair of tennis shoes and walking. Walking 20 minutes twice a day after, either during high anxiety or after a trauma experience, is more effective than Xanax. And what do we do least in our society? Walk. And so to answer your question, sir, at the very beginning, maybe we have more anxiety in our society because of the fast pace, and people don't walk anymore. Think of all of the walking our grandparents did. And there was no Xanax around. So we've forgotten many of the basics, haven't we? We forgot that our brain is an organ that needs healing. And it's not always about willpower and character when we're depressed. Okay? So the brain is on high drive. I tell my anxious high schoolers, you've got a foot on the gas pedal, and at the same time you have a foot on the brake. So you got this engine roaring and you're not going anywhere. So how do we take our foot off of the gas pedal is how I teach my clients how to take their foot off the gas pedal so that they can slow down and eventually take their foot off the brake. So my approach to anxiety and depression is a toolbox approach, giving people the tools to manage their anxiety and depression. It's quite simple, but it's not falling off a log. So I have lots of brochures that I give to the high schooler, the young adult, and to the patient, him or herself. So they always have homework. I want you to practice this all week and tell me if you got any results. We can't not talk about gaming. Okay, next. So, just like a glass of wine and an entire bottle of wine, gaming has been shown to improve coordination skills, reactivity skills, problem-solving skills. Just as a glass of wine is very good for you, one glass, just as 1 hour of video gaming can be very good for you, but not 8 hours. Do you know what my great-grandfather said to my grandfather? My grandfather was born in 1900. He told me this: the ruination of you kids is going to be that telephone. Hey, gaming, video games, online, it's here to stay. So we got to get rid of the all or nothing thinking. And how do you moderate? Eating one Big Mac might be good for you, but eating seven times a week is not going to be good for you. So like yesterday, I got a pumpkin spice shake at Culver's. Oh, it was so good. But I won't have another one for 2 months. It becomes a treat then. But if I drank a shake every night, if I drank a bottle of wine every night, so parents, you have to deal with moderation. And you have to set the boundaries. These teenagers unless they're exceptional, cannot set the boundaries for themselves. Because you get caught up in the game, and oh my God, it's 4 hours later. Yes, thank you.
The first sentence contradicts itself, as I read it up there on the top. It says, found students who play strategic video games reported gaining increased problem-solving skills and enhanced their skills, led to better grades.
Yes,
So playing video games got better grades.
if in moderation.
In moderation.
Because the studies say the same thing about a glass of red wine every night. That the Mediterranean diet with a glass of red wine is very healthy for you. But a bottle of wine is not good for you. So I give you this research to say you got to get away from the negativity of video gaming because it's here to stay. But you need to moderate it. It has to be a time limit. 1 hour on school nights, 3 hours on weekends is what the research indicates is healthy. But if your kid spends 8 hours on Saturdays playing video games, the research says it's too much for the brain, just as a bottle of wine is too much for the brain. Brain scans of the nation's gamers found enhanced cortical thickness, cognitive flexibility. So gaming in itself is not going to be harmful, it's too much of it is what's harmful. Factors like depression, antisocial personality traits, family violence are far more likely to trigger aggressive behavior than video gaming. I find this hard to believe also because I watched Fortnite and I had to turn it off. It was just too violent for me. But the research says that violent gaming is less risky than having a violent home, where people are screaming and throwing things at each other in the home. So I encourage you to Google the research for yourself, because there's a lot out there now. We've had video gaming for almost a generation now, so there's a lot of research. Go to Google and Google it. The impact of gaming on the adolescent brain. And there are studies that contradict, that say no. But I don't think we can take it totally away from our young people, because some of the research indicates that some video gaming is very good, very healthy for the brain. Yes? Very good. In video gaming, there is so much movement, so much light, so much color. That's why anything more than several hours is going to, just like you have your foot on the brake and the foot on the gas pedal, it's going to do damage to your engine if you do that for 3 hours versus 5 to 10 minutes. So that's a good insight. It's the quantity that we have to be alert to. The quantity. You guys would play once a week? Every other week. Oh, he plays every other week, right? How often do you play? Every day? Not every day? Just weekends. Good for you. Good for you. Yeah, moderation, guys, gals. Moderation. Just, because like this lady said, astutely, the lights, the movement, the colors, it's really wearing on the brain. It's a lot to react to for more than an hour or two. Next. Next. So the human brain is a social brain. These skills are of primary importance to fulfill our biological imperatives of staying alive. From this perspective, it's no wonder that so much of our brains, I always chuckle, and I think I'm getting used to it. When I say to one of my clients, who's your best friends? Who are your friends that you play video games with? George in Scotland, and Mary in Ireland, and they have friends all over the world now. So that's interesting, right? Do you have video game partners that are out of O'Fallon? You do? You do. No, no. Yes. No. Yes. Yes. What about you, sir? And what about you? You have video gaming partners outside of O'Fallon? No? Okay. So some people stay local, only with friends that they go to school with, and others go global. So, next. Next. Okay. So, these guys and gals are called centennials. The millennials are entering the workforce. And I hear all kinds of concerns about their work ethic. So we got the centennials. So you were born in 2005, 2002, 2001. So these are the millennials. You know, I'm a baby boomer. How many baby boomers we got in the room? And so we got any Generation X? Generation Y?
Well, you could say I'm from the 80s.
Yeah. And then we had the millennials, now we got the centennials. Majority of teens aren't sticking to one site, but are using multiple media sites. It's important to stay informed about social media platforms they use and the pros and cons of each. Facebook is obsolete, right? Is any of you use Facebook? What about you in the back? Raise your hand if you use Facebook. Okay, 1, 2, 3 out of all of them. So Facebook and email, right? Facebook and email, right?
I don't believe that.
Facebook will become a white elephant in two generations, right? Seriously, don't put any more money in the stocks of Facebook because in 2 generations it's going to be crashed. Now you got India and China, so a lot can happen. But Snapchat, right? Is that the number one? Snapchat is number 1. Instagram second, and then texting third, right? Am I accurate? I've become an expert in adolescent habits. You know? Okay. So, non-binary approach. It's not either or, but setting boundaries. FaceTime in real time. You know? How do you keep FaceTime with your family? By mealtime, right? And I hear it's so hard to schedule meal times. So if you can't do it during the week, make it absolutely a priority on Saturday or Sunday. But I know it's hard because high schoolers are working on weekends. So it's a real challenge to have FaceTime with one another, isn't it? It's a real challenge. Next. So, let's go into assessment and intervention. I'm going to stop right here. The questions, because this lady over here asked, what can we do about anxiety and depression? We're going to move into that now. But any questions, comments, concerns? Yes, thank you.
I've actually read a couple of times about these early childhood traumas, being the more that an individual has, the greater the risk of depression. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah, she's asking about early childhood trauma. There is research going on about cellular memory, that our brain cells remember the trauma even though we're consciously not remembering it. And that's what we call a trigger. Suddenly a trigger activates that early childhood or late childhood trauma. Yeah, there's some... if you want to write this down, it's not on your resource page, but John Bradshaw is the guru in healing childhood trauma. From the 80s, 90s, and he just died last year at the age of 80-something. But John Bradshaw has about 20 books. He has a wonderful website, BRADSHAW. But he's devoted his whole career to healing childhood trauma. His website is wonderful. He's got at least 20 books. When people have a suicidal thought, it's called suicidal. 2 forms of suicidal ideation, active and passive. Active is when you have a plan. Passive, when you just have the thought. I don't want to scare anybody, but suicidal thoughts are sometimes normal for some people, but they don't want to die. So I always ask, do you have suicidal thoughts? Yeah. Do you want to die? No. So I know that person is pretty safe. When they have a suicidal thought and they say, I want to die, the risk jumps up 90%. So don't panic if your son or daughter or your spouse has a suicidal thought, because they are very fleeting and they come and go. But when that thought becomes a desire to die, we need professional help. Okay? So sleep all hinges on this. We talked about that earlier. We talked about all of these symptoms that are yellow flags. Next. So what are some of the protective factors to help the person find a reason for living? Whether it's your grandchildren, whether it's your career, your spouse, your football career, really try to hang your hat on something that's very meaningful for this person. Your religious faith, you can tap into that. I strongly encourage that. Support from healthcare professionals, getting effective treatment, and helping the person identify immediate and long-term goals. So, we went over the symptoms of depression and anxiety. Notice them. Thoughts or plans, intent to act on a plan. I'm just very concerned about parents who do not lock up their medications. You know, the psychotropic medications, whether it's antidepressant or anti-anxiety drug. Kids are selling Xanax for $10, $20 in the high school corridors. Their Adderall, their mother's Adderall, they're selling. So make sure that your family members are not taking your prescription. Okay? And if you are taking an anti-anxiety medication, don't say, here, try one of mine, it works for me. Would you give cardiac medicine? Would you give chemotherapy pill that you're taking to one of your friends or family members? No, 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 no. They're prescription for a reason. Okay, hold on. Let me see what else we got up here. Lack of health insurance, prior suicide attempt, exposure to someone else's suicide. Unfortunately, often in high schools, suicides come in pairs, or triplets. We're not quite sure why, but unfortunately it does happen. Unbearable pain, isolation, abusing marijuana or alcohol, or abusing opiates. These are all high risk factors. Persons may use alcohol, marijuana, opiates, nicotine to manage emotions. Unfortunately, talk to any drug dealer, which I have, for the first 2 weeks the drugs are free. The street drugs are free. Why? Why are they free the first 2 weeks? What? Because they work! Hello? Wow, I'm not anxious. Wow, I feel better. But we know that after 2 weeks, what used to take one pill to get that same relief, that same effect, now takes 2 to get the same effect. And that's where addiction comes in. So young people tell me, man, I smoked pot and I could focus, I could play soccer better, I just felt so much better. And I want to feel that way all the time, so I start smoking every day before school. But now I'm smoking in the parking lot at lunch, and now I'm smoking after school, and now I'm smoking at night. So there are people who can drink 1 or 2 beers or 1 or 2 glasses of wine a week. And I've met a few high school kids, not very many, I've met a few high school kids who can smoke pot once a week. I don't ask my high school students anymore if they smoke pot. I ask how much. Unfortunately, that's what I'm finding. The other, I think I have a slide coming up about that. Go ahead. So a dual diagnosis is when you're abusing drugs and alcohol and you have anxiety or depression. So this is what our teenagers and middle school know, 8th grade to 12th grade. So 8th graders are using marijuana, 12th graders are using marijuana, and then Adderall, Vicodin, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So about almost 4 out of 10 high schoolers are using marijuana. Next. Percent who perceive smoking pot is no big deal. It doesn't harm my developing brain. At least I'm not drinking every day, Mom. So it's about 4 out of 10 high schoolers thinks that marijuana does not harm the brain. They believe that. Marijuana is safe. It doesn't affect my... From birth to age 28, this thing called the frontal lobe is developing. We now have brain images of adolescents who use marijuana for 10 years. From age 14 to 24. It's not pretty, folks. The frontal lobe stops developing around age 28. Our maximum capacity is at 28. We now have images of kids who smoke pot daily for like 10 years, and the frontal lobe is damaged. So, would you want your son or daughter drinking a shot of Jack Daniels every day? Now, do you give your 16, 18-year-old son a Budweiser, a beer at a barbecue once a week, once a month? So, smoking marijuana in extreme moderation, I say this with great trepidation and hesitation, 4 out of 10 high schoolers are smoking pot. I have to take approach, and I know this, they're going to play video games. And a lot of them are going to smoke pot. You have to instill in them that daily marijuana usage is killing valuable brain cells. We have brain imaging to prove that. It's not harmless. Are they going to smoke pot once a month at a party in someone's basement? Of course. But that's not the same as smoking pot every day. Having a Budweiser once a month at a family barbecue when they're 17 years old is not drinking a shot of Jack Daniels every morning or every night. Next. Percentage of teens who report daily pot usage. So it's going down because high schoolers are getting in their health classes, their biology classes, this scientific data. These images. Remember when we were kids, it was pictures of lungs who smoked cigarettes and lungs who didn't smoke cigarettes. Remember that when you were in high school health class? High schoolers, hopefully, at the Panthers, are getting pictures of brains of kids who smoke pot every day and brains of kids who smoke pot once a month. Hopefully they're seeing that with their own eyes. Okay. Next. So here's some Illinois. You can go to this website, Illinois Facts and Figures, about adolescence and substance abuse. Next. So drugs plus depression is a dangerous combination. Adolescents who smoke marijuana at least once a week are 3 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts. It's called self-medicating. Next. So what is a safety plan? Next. So self-injury is scratching, burning, cutting to relieve emotional pain. It's not a suicide attempt. So don't freak out. when your son or daughter are cutting, it's not a suicide attempt. It means they're living with some extreme emotional pain. The physical focus, the physical pain distracts them from the emotional pain. And what I do with persons who are living with that high anxiety is to give them tools to manage the anxiety. And if that doesn't work, medication. So that they don't have to physically hurt themselves to manage the anxiety. So, what are the steps? What's the level of risk? Are they using pot every day? Are they having rage attacks? Are they not sleeping well? They're not getting exercise in sunlight and sunshine? Their appetite and food intake is way out of whack? Remember all those risks we went through? What needs immediate attention? Who needs to be alerted? Never blindside your spouse, your elderly parent, or your child. Tell them, hey, we need to go to a counselor, or we need to go to your doctor. I can't tell you how many high school kids in the waiting room, the parents told them, hey, you're here to see Dr. Behrman for counseling. And then I have a rage attack in my waiting room. But for some parents, that's the only way they can get their kid help. And I get that. And I can manage rage attacks, panic attacks in my waiting room. I've done it many times. Inform the persons, never blindside them, and take a harm reduction. In other words, how can I keep this person safe? What's the safest thing to do right now? What's their capacity? How much pain? Some of us can live with a lot of pain, emotional and physical. Others of us can't. Do they have a history of panic attacks? How isolated are they? And have they lost what's meaningful in their life? So pay attention to every mother. I've yet to meet a mother who cannot tell when their son or daughter is lying. Is that true? Mothers are so good at that, aren't they? Come on, tell me the truth. What you just said is not true. So pay attention to those body language. Know the risk and protective factors. Notice how they behave under stress. And always obtain collateral. Call the teacher. Hey, how's John doing in school? Call the basketball coach. Call grandpa. Get collateral information. Because kids are very good, and so are spouses, are very good at hiding their symptoms from the people who care the most about them. So here's the difficult questions to directly ask. And use your own language, but you need to ask the question. I can't tell you how many parents who brought their kid to me said, when I asked them, I was shocked that they said, yes, I have suicidal thoughts. I had no idea that my kid was thinking of that. Because they never asked the question before. Do you ever wish you could go to sleep and never wake up? You know, John, sometimes when people feel sad, they have thoughts of harming or killing themselves. Have you ever had such thoughts? Yes, Dad. Are you thinking about killing yourself right now? No. Good. But I still think we need to see a counselor. This is bigger than me. If you don't ask, they're not going to tell you. Spouses don't tell their partner. Definitely 80-year-old grandparents do not tell their adult children that they're suicidal. They want to protect you from that. You need to ask grandpa. You need to ask your spouse. You need to ask the 14-year-old. Do you want to die? And if they tell you what method they would use, that's high alert. So what requires immediate action when they talk about suicide? And that's why, how big of a challenge it is to monitor your kids' Snapchat. I literally had a client last night, not today, who said, my son is here today because one of his friends shared with me what was on Snapchat. I just want to go away. Nobody miss me. I want to die. He didn't say that to his mother or father, but he said it to his friend on Snapchat. So I don't think it's a boundary invasion by asking your son or daughter every now and then, hey, can I see your record, your communication between your friends? Diminishing impulse control, substance abuse, problems at school, on the job, high-risk behaviors, previous suicide. So what can we do? That link down there is a safety plan that I use with all my clients, whether they're 70 years old or 17. But it's a real clear plan of what to do if the suicidal thoughts come back. Eliminate firearms and ropes, medications. It's hard to get rid of every poisonous material. It's very hard. Unfortunately, I had a senior in high school client who had a rage attack because his parents called him on his marijuana use, and he had such a rage, he literally stole his mom's car keys and drove the car into a tree. Luckily, he was not seriously injured. Carbon monoxide. So don't leave them alone. If someone's in imminent danger, if you have a suspicion that a person is seriously considering harming himself, let the person know that you care, that they cannot be alone, and that you're there to help. I'm sure all of you have had at least one experience of putting the phone down and saying, God, I hope she doesn't do something stupid tonight, and she's alone. It's a scary thing to leave someone who's really depressed with poor impulse control, to leave them alone. It's scary. You have to work with the family and friends. Don't take it all on by yourself. I don't take it all on by myself. That's why my safety plan always includes the school counselor, the parents, uncles and aunts. I try to bring in as many people that's safe for the client, because a lot of us want secrecy and boundaries. But I let the family know, I alone can't keep your child safe. You as a father alone can't keep your child safe. But never blindside the person. Say, hey, I'm going to have to let your coach know that you're really depressed. And then he may freak out, but say, hey, we're trying to keep you safe. And use the language that you know best to keep him or her from panicking. Recognize the limits of confidentiality. Sometimes you have to break. Promise me you won't tell him. How many of you have had this? When a friend said, promise me you won't tell anybody that I have a suicidal thought. That's scary, isn't it? When your friend says that to you? Don't keep that promise. Say, hey, I love you too much to keep this a secret. Come on, let's go talk to your mom. No, don't talk to mom. Well, how about tomorrow morning we talk to the school counselor? But don't promise that you'll keep it a secret. Don't. Because it's bigger than you. You alone cannot keep that person alive. So everybody in this room should memorize 273 talk, 273 talk, 273 talk. That's a live counselor 24/7. It's a live counselor 24/7. Okay? Make an informed judgment of the risk. Err on the side of overreacting. I just want to warn you though, if you take your son or daughter or spouse or grandparent to the emergency room, expect a 12 to 24-hour wait. Because there's no empty beds. If you come in with suicidal thoughts, the hospital has to admit you. Has to. And what takes 12 to 24 hours is an empty bed. There just aren't enough, there's not enough beds. Memorial and St. Elizabeth's don't have beds. There's no beds at those two hospitals for suicidal patients. So try to stay with them, literally in the same room through the night, and take them to your primary care physician the next morning, or take them to a counselor the next morning. Because it can create a real trauma to sit in the emergency room for 18 hours. Now, the physician and or the counselor may say, you need to go to the emergency room. But it's hard for the parent to judge that. But if you don't take them to the emergency room, make sure you stay physically with them in the same room till the next morning. Do not leave that person alone. Stay within your scope of competence. Consult. While you're always willing to listen, you may not be the best person to be helping the suicidal person. Partner with professionals. Find professionals whose religious or cultural backgrounds are similar to your beliefs. Recognize your limits. If your loved one had cancer, would you say, my love is enough to get you through this? You don't need to see an oncologist. My love is enough. Be aware of the kids your son or daughter is hanging out with. Sometimes your kid is fine until he's with the daily pot smoking kids who don't care about school, who have no dreams or ambitions for after high school. It can wear off on your son or daughter. And the kid starts struggling to keep his head above water. I think it's very fair to know and meet and insist that your son and daughter's friends come to your home and you get to meet them. And sit down and talk with them. I just heard it too often, folks. He was such a good kid until junior year in high school. He started hanging around these kids who didn't care about college or careers, didn't care about their grades. So beware of silos. Make sure you're talking to each other. Husbands talking to spouses, to wives, adult children talking to other adult children. Make sure you're partnering, that you're not taking this all on by yourself. Listen for what's most meaningful. Don't stigmatize. There's something wrong with you that you're depressed. Nobody in my family is going to see a shrink. Get over it. All that stigmatizing language. You know, the true story in the 1990s, a kid came to school with undiagnosed schizophrenia. He started hearing psychotic voices. This is a true story. And my student was the social worker in that school, and she called the parents in and says, your son is psychotic. I don't know if he has schizophrenia, but he's 18 years old, 17, 18. I think he needs to be checked out by a psychiatrist to determine if it's drug-induced or whatever. No kid of mine is going to see a shrink. Drug him out of the counselor's office. And guess what he did that night? He killed his mother. This happened in St. Anne, Missouri. Killed his mother and wounded his father. He got tried as an adult, so he must have been 17. And like I said, the social worker in that situation was my student, so she told me all the inside stuff that went on. He got tried as an adult and got life imprisonment without parole. Got put on antipsychotic medication in prison. Got a college degree and taught other prisoners how to read. In his 12th year, I think, of prison, he got raped and killed by adult prisoners. True story. Next. So what are some take-home messages? The more self-reliant I am, I can get through this myself, the safer they are. Suicide only impacts the persons directly involved. It impacts the whole, that should be plural there. It affects the whole high school community, doesn't it? When one high schooler dies by suicide. not just the family. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible event. Any pastoral team member or parent is competent. Anybody can do this. Anybody can address suicidal issues. These are false assumptions. Early detection, know the warning signs, ask direct questions, get the resources you need, and collaborate with community experts. Thanks for being here tonight. I would like to open it up to questions and comments and reactions. And secondly, I'll be hanging out back there if anybody has any one-on-one. I did leave some of my business cards here if anybody wants to take one home. And I think those of you who want all these hyperlinks, if you want to quickly share the resources on here, you took them off.
No, I took them off.
Okay.
But they can, there's
There's a
sheets.
sign-up sheet if you want the electronic version of this with the live links to click on. Because almost all these slides, if you notice, have links for more details. If you want an email with this presentation attached, sign up. Resources are passed out, the resource pages. Yes.
Yes, I had a question in regards to the 80% of white males who have a history of suicide.
High risk for suicide.
There is a stigma attached to mental health issues in the African American community. So my question, or my wondering, is that I wonder how many people have, who have shared mental health issues among the African American community, since there's such a stigma.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm wondering how many people have committed suicide but no one talks about it because it's not acceptable.
Right. There's an African American professor in the School of Social Work at WashU who's doing research on that very question. How much high risk behavior in the black adolescent community isn't really suicide attempts? Right. Yeah, I just have a 36-year-old African-American male therapist who's joining my practice. He's going to start on Fridays after January, or in January. But he's a rare bird. And we need so many African-American, Latino, Asian therapists. They're just not around. There's just not very many of them. Yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Go to the agent spot on our elderly, ask them, you can help me. I want assisted suicide.
Oh wow, that's another whole topic. Assisted suicide. When someone who's in severe pain, or someone who is old and not wanting to live anymore, that's a whole different ethical question. Yes?
Were your witness to the handouts you've spoken of, were they in this resource packet to seating and the nutrition?
Are they in the resource packet? Are they?
Oh, no, that's what I meant.
Oh, they're not.
They're not.
I don't know if they are or not.
I will email the entire presentation.
Good. And then I'll email you the tapping and some of those other resources tomorrow. And they can go along with it. Okay. So, I don't want anybody... Yes, thank you.
How do you feel about the trend of nurse practitioners handling cases, and are they normally under a psychiatrist, and at some point, if you're being taken care of a nurse practitioner, should you seek a doctor?
So the question is about the qualifications and training of nurse practitioners. Those that are going into psychiatric nursing are very well trained. Depending on the state, in some states the nurse practitioner has to practice under a physician. In Missouri they do not. So I would feel, myself personally, I would feel very comfortable seeing a nurse practitioner. I would think she's just as qualified as a physician. The reason I say that, we need more mental health providers. And if a nurse practitioner is available, I'll go for it. Yes.
Is
someone that you know who has died by suicide, our daughter died by suicide, and we run a support group for people who are grieving the loss of someone by suicide right here in O'Fallon. So we meet every second and fourth Thursday of the month in the old City Hall building with Carla Smith, Behavioral Health, that's our daughter. And we meet on the second and fourth Thursday for anyone who is grieving the loss of someone by suicide, and every first and third Thursday for any family member of anyone dealing with mental illness. So if you're in that situation...
So we can go to your website. What's it called?
The website is Carla Smith. That's Carla with a K, Carla Smith Behavioral Health, and it is on the website.
And it's also in my handout.
Okay.
So it's also in the resource pages, the Carla Smith. So, you know, I don't want everybody to have a hammer and looking for nails, and that everything, you know, deserves a hammer and a nail. Use your good adult child parent judgment. You know, I hope I gave you enough insight to say, yes, this is bigger than me. It requires a professional. I hope I gave you some insight into that. Many, and I say this, many sessions, I can make, a good therapist can make a difference in 1 or 2 sessions. If you bring your son or daughter or your spouse to a therapist, sometimes it doesn't take a year of therapy. Okay? I think many people are afraid of that. Sometimes it takes 1 hour, 2 hours of good resource building, good encouragement to make a huge difference. Okay? Any other questions or comments?
Well,
Yes, thank you.
When I was growing up, my family was completely overprotective with me, and I'm just going to suggest to parents today, be careful on how overprotective you're going to be with your children, because later on in their life, it is going to hurt them more than it will help them.
Mm-hmm. So you use good judgment.
Yes.
When is this bigger than me and requires a professional, and when can we as a family handle this? And I hope I gave you enough information on the risk factors that require professional help. Okay? And I really thank the young people for being here today. I hope that this was helpful and beneficial. And I hope that you take good care of each other, but don't take on your friends' problems all by yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Behrman, for coming tonight. I think everyone found it very helpful, and we're glad to see this good group of young people here. They just made a retreat last week together, so they're extra holy. But good to have them here, good to have so many parents and grandparents and others. But thank you so much for coming.